we see more toxicity, so much more failure, and relationships just being destructive. And we only have a small group that we actually look at as a collective society to get hope and inspiration from. But when we see one of those falling or fragile or have some type of crack or vulnerability, it kind of deflates us. So it has an impact on us. I don't know why we got
What,
away from that part of the conversation when we was able to hone in on it.
what
Because
couple are
then,
you talking about?
Can I add something?
well, the Aisha and Steph Curry couple, but I would say that's just one of them. Like there's many other couples. Like LeBron and Savannah was one of them. I think Will and Jada was one at one point until that started to fall apart.
Can I add something?
Go ahead, bro.
Great. Um, so this is where I think this is where I think some men are weak. I don't like, I will never date a man who cares about what other men think. If in fact you do not have your own thought process, if you cannot think for yourself, if you are not validated by yourself and by the things that you produce, you can't date me. If you care what someone else thinks about you, that's weak to me. I see that as a weakness. We don't think for ourselves. We don't make up our own realities. We want to rely on what other people are doing. You're looking to your left and your right, to your neighbors to your left and your right, to figure out what to do in life. And I think that we need to figure out what we want. That's why people criticize me when I'm up here speaking for myself. People are criticizing me saying I will be single forever just because I have my own idea of the type of man that I want. How are you mad at me for what I want and I am not joining in with every other woman and what they want? I can't want what they want. We do not, as a society, think for ourselves and make up our own realities for ourselves. You look for inspiration in other people, and you should be the inspiration for other people, but you can't be the inspiration for other people because you can't think for yourself. You're going off of too much of what other people are doing and thinking, that you can't even make up your own reality and be that non-toxic couple that you want to see. If you are what you want to see, it will become something in the world. Until then, you're going to look around and see toxic people. And then because you look to other people for inspiration, you are also going to be toxic. That's your choice, though. But I choose to think for myself independently and search for something that is going to fit me instead of trying to figure out what everybody else is doing and being like, I think that's a good idea. I'm going to join with it too. And then I'm going to be miserable. It's dumb.
Bro, can I offer something? I think so I do care about what people think, right? But there's an asterisk there. I only care about what my peers think. Now, my peers aren't men who make the type of just necessarily make the type of money I make. My peers are men who are also as intelligent as me, but they're also as emotionally intelligent as me. Also, they're just as empathetic as me, and they're just as principled as me. But not only that, they can see perspectives. You know, they try to see perspectives. They try to come up with solutions, and when you're engaging in conversation with them, they they engage in good faith, right? Those are my peers. So not just somebody who make money, not if you have all of those things, then your opinion is genuinely valuable to me. I think you have a valuable opinion. So I care about what you think because it only makes sense for me to care about what you think. I
No,
understand what you're saying, but I think that what you mean is slightly different from some things that you said.
no, they're not. She mean what she say. Trust me. She's very meticulous in what she say. But I will say this: the type of man that she would prefer to date are the guys who, whenever they lean on their own understanding or their own type of thinking and don't have any principle or any oversight or anything to look to as a replica or as a template to go by, have failed drastically. Like if you look at Adam, The very reason why uh, he made the decision to hearken to Eve's voice is because he wanted to think for himself and make a decision, and he didn't care about what another man thought, what God thought. He exited him out and focused on what she wanted. He thought for himself. So I think that every man should have at least two figures that they rely on, not necessarily for their thinking, because inspiration is different than making you incapacitated from making your own decisions. Inspiration just give you a blueprint, a template, or some type of hope in disguise of a choice that you could potentially make if you were faced with the same situation. So it doesn't make you. It doesn't mean that you can't think for yourself. It just means that you have somebody that can inspire the decision making whenever you do think for yourself.
I,
So if you take Moses, the reason why he wasn't able to go across the Sea of Jordan is because he at various times he was thinking of himself. He didn't wasn't focused or he wasn't concerned about what God thought about the decisions he was making. So a lot of these scenarios will give you an example of great kings falling because they didn't rely on the thinking that came before them. A lot of men today, a lot of young YNs out here, they don't have fathers in their life. They don't have anybody to give them that blueprint, that mentality to shape their way of thinking. So whenever these people are going, society is the way it is right now because people are leaning on their own understanding and thinking for themselves. That's why you got motherfuckers. That's why you got our community is the way it is. There is no structure. The structure was supposed to be created from some type of thinking that came before you, so that you could follow it, and it's actually curated in a way to where it gives you the best outcome. And at whatever degree of difficulty, because we don't accept it and we just move on our own. That is why we in this situation we're in. So I understand you don't want to date a man who can't think of himself, but I think you're over exaggerating what we mean when we say that we look to people for inspiration. We can still think for ourselves, but a lot of our decision making is going to be inspired by somebody who's been there before. So if I'm looking a real dope dad to set up a merchandise store or whatever online merch to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, I might not think about the process or carry out the decision making based on what I think is fit. I'm going to lean on him to give me the guidance on that, and I think that's totally fine if you want to try to have a higher success rate in what you're doing.
I think the solution is somewhere in the middle of what both of y'all are saying. Um, like, no, actually, what you're saying is absolutely right. But I do think that there are a lot of people and there are a lot of men who take the take the inspiration a little bit too far. Like there's a lot of men who can't do anything but just repeat talking points. There's a lot of women too. And I do think that we should nurture the ability to think for ourselves, which doesn't mean, don't take in information, but be able to develop your own thought pattern, you know, to determine what's right, what's wrong, what's reasonable, what's not. There are a lot of men who just in the comments, be a lot of men who just they're not thinking when they're talking. And I can tell you talked and you didn't think before you wrote that. You're just doing. So I understand what she's talking about. I do think she overstated the part of, not wanting a man who gains inspiration from other people, or that's kind of what it sounded like she's saying. But I truly do think that she means something slightly different from what she said, even if she
And I
didn't
think I think
articulate
a
it.
lot of women I think a lot of women capitalize, and it may be a manipulative strategy. They capitalize off of men who don't use some type of source or some type of guidance to govern their thoughts or the decision making. But that allows the woman to be able to take that place, be able to command the inspiration on how he thinks so she can kind of manipulate him into the man she wants to be. And it may be detrimental to him individually, which is why it's important for men to read, to stay read up, stay read up on the word, books, whatever you like, whatever you inspired by, and use those things that are positive, that can help shape your decisions, that can help you keep you in some type of order or keep you on a straightened path. instead of just going out here and just running around with a chicken. Because nobody, you know what I'm saying? You don't know what you're going to face individually, but people who came before you, like your fathers, your teachers, professors, or whatever is in the Bible, it has been here long before you. So it's totally fine leaning on something that's already worked before you, or whatever.
So, life is a series of experiences and lessons. People go through life and they pick up things. They should, absolutely. Because coming in the world, we don't know anything. We grow up, we live life, we learn. We learn what we like, what we don't like. The type of man that I admire is a man that takes his experiences, that takes his lessons, and he picks what he needs from it. And he builds who he is, who he likes to be, who he is comfortable with. That man does not need validation from anyone because he knows who he is. He knows where he's going. He knows where he's been. What I think is weak is when men seek validation and get embarrassed because other men are looking at him a certain way. You know who you are. You know exactly who you got. You gonna check it or you not, but you don't care nothing about what anybody else thinks because you live life on your own terms. The thing about men who seek validation and who seek inspiration too much from other men in society, those men take exactly what they've been told and all of these dumbass, like traditional values in the book and all of that that was interpreted for them, that was told to them, and they accepted it word for word, line for line, and never ever made what they wanted for themselves. They were given it, they took it, and they made it theirs, and they don't know anything else but that. I don't like those men because oftentimes that does not work for me because I live life on my own terms. I know exactly how relationships have gone, and I respect that. But a lot of that doesn't work in this day and age, and I recognize that. I don't want a man who sticks to things just because they worked for someone else. I want a man who makes his life his own. That's the only man that's going to ever get along with me.
Well,
Ever.
I think every man should choose a woman who is going to cooperate, and whenever he make a decision or he's inspired by anything that could shape his decision, should be quiet and stay in her place as a woman and rest in her femininity. And every man that has a network, has a brotherhood, has a friend, should hold on for dear life to that and look for validation in that. Those guys are gonna keep you accountable. They're gonna make sure that you're doing the right things. They're gonna stay on top of you. The woman has proven biologically and psychologically she's unreliable today in a lot of cases. She will walk away from you at a 70% clip. So if you rely on her and validate everything off of her, you're fighting a losing battle. Whenever you walk through that court and get those divorce papers and she clean you out, the last thing standing is your network. The last thing standing is your brothers that you served in the military with. The last thing that standing is those teammates that helped you get across the end zone whenever you were playing for championships. Those guys are always going to be there. There's a male loneliness epidemic because guys are being turned away from making friends with one another, building networks with one another, building groups with one another, and they're relying on this emotional intelligence bullshit and trying to hitch to a woman to validate themselves. And then they're out of the game of validating themselves by hitching themselves to a brotherhood of men that are going to stay there for the long run. You cannot rely on the woman these days to be your validating process. You should be validating yourself through the fruit that you produce, the accomplishments you make, the accolades you make. Validate yourself by the purpose that you was able to define for yourself, and also validate yourself around the circle that you built around yourself. Those guys are going to tell you when you're wrong. They're going to tell you when you're right, and most definitely validate yourself by the principles and standards you live for God. not a woman.